just want to make sure.
Well, welcome. This is our sixth in our series of psychological health talks, and the second in this series. It's based on the book that I wrote, The Prevention of Depression. Today we're going to start looking at some of the specific skills that are associated in research with being able to prevent this kind of recurrent depression that we talked about last week. So please take time to look at the initial session last week to understand more about this, but we're going to dive more specifically into the skills this week, next week, and the following week, so that you can both see what's available by the research and begin to develop some of these skills to make sure that you're living your best quality life. So the first of those is the ability to be more mindful in our lives. And we're going to be focused on that today. Mindfulness became a very, very hot topic over the last decade, 2 decades or so. Full disclosure, I began my own mindfulness practice back in 1972. So that may be longer than some of you who are viewing this were alive. Certainly it's been a long journey for me to make sure that this is an incorporated part of my daily life, my daily practice, to make sure that I am as mindful as possible. We'll talk about some of the nuances of that as a result, and there are some things that I want to mention today that will be different than what you might hear from other therapists that are advocating mindfulness, because I have a very specific view of it that I think is very specifically tied to why mindfulness can be a benefit in order to help us to prevent a depressive episode from recurring in our lives. So what I'd like to start with is that mindfulness is a particular way of paying attention. Now, that's the first point of disagreement. So many times mindfulness is presented as a way of relaxing, a way of getting away from a difficult situation, a way of keeping ourselves level and calm and peaceful. But that isn't the essence of what mindfulness is, and that isn't the essence of why mindfulness can help us to reduce the recurring depressive episodes. Mindfulness is a particular way of paying attention to what's going on in our lives. It's not a way of escaping from what's going on in our lives. It's paying attention. Now, there are several elements of this paying attention that are important. The first of them is that it's paying attention on purpose. We're going to look at each of these more in depth. Paying attention on purpose means I'm choosing to pay attention rather than something has interrupted me and that's why I'm paying attention. It's paying attention in the present moment. We often hear about being in the present moment as part of mindfulness. We'll talk about why that's important and what the benefits and risks of being too in the present moment might be, and paying attention without judgment. This is an essential feature, and it is one of the more difficult aspects of learning to pay attention in this way. So let's dive into each of these in some more depth so that you can understand how they relate to helping us to not get caught in this episodic, repeated depressive cycle. So the first part of it is paying attention on purpose. We do a lot of things in our lives that are kind of on automatic pilot, and that's necessary because let me kind of frame it this way. Somebody who probably didn't have enough to do once figured out that we can pay attention, potentially, to about 16 billion bits of information at any particular moment in our lives. That's an overwhelming amount of information that we could be paying attention to at any moment in our lives. In fact, while you're listening to this video, you could also be paying attention to your cat who is trying to get your attention, or to a sound that's outside of your window, or to a sensation you're having in your body as you're listening to this. There are multiple things that we could be paying attention to at any particular time. If we are trying to be conscious of what we're paying attention to, the best research suggests that we can pay attention to approximately 7 bits of information at any particular moment. So 16 billion possibilities, 7 bits of information that we can consciously pay attention to. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore everything. Our bodies, our brains are constantly doing things that are outside of our conscious attention. Our breathing, most of the time, is happening without us having to pay attention to it. There are many things that are going on in our bodies. Our blood pressure, our digestion, all of those things are taking place, and we don't have to consciously choose to engage with those things in order for them to occur. We do a lot of other things that are able to be done without our conscious attention. For example, at the end of a work day, many people get in their car, they drive home, and they arrive in their driveway, and they have no idea how they got there. Because while they were driving, they were reviewing something that happened at work, they were thinking about what they were going to do at home that night, they were engaged in all kinds of other thoughts. And during that time, driving became an automated activity. Now, the fact is that you and I do this. The scary thing is that other drivers are doing it too. And that means that a lot of what's going on the road when we're driving alongside of other drivers or in traffic, others are also automating their behavior. Now, it doesn't mean that if an emergency happens, something jumped in front of your vehicle, you wouldn't notice it, and it would be interrupted and you'd suddenly take conscious control. But it is the case that much of our lives, we engage in things because they are the automatic things that we do, not because we consciously choose them. And that leads to a bit of a problem, because then what engages us is what interrupts that kind of habitual behavior and intrudes. The easiest thing to intrude is something that seems threatening or difficult for us. So, for example, if somebody comes in to our room and yells at us, that will disengage us from any automatic behaviors, because we'll suddenly become focused on this potential threat. One of the problems with that is that with all of the social media and the news, 24-hour news cycles and all of that, we are constantly being interrupted by things that appear to be threatening to us. And those threats capture our attention and pull our awareness, pull our attention to places that the interruption is trying to lead us, rather than in places that we choose to place our attention. That becomes a problem, for example, in many relationships. Two people can be in the same room and so absorbed in something that's distracting them that they don't notice what is actually a more important element of their quality of their life, to pay attention to the relationship they're in with this individual. developing the quality of being able to pay attention on purpose is one of the things that makes us more mindful, so that I can choose in my life what's important to me and choose to allocate some of that precious attention, that precious conscious awareness to the things that are truly important, and not be dragged off by things that are less important or simply annoying for us. This is something that athletes have to learn, for example. To be a high-performing athlete, you have to learn to ignore some of the discomfort in your body so you can stay focused on the athletic task in front of you. If you are working in a difficult situation, you may choose to endure a certain amount of discomfort because you are choosing to pay attention on purpose to the goal in front of you. This is part of what it means to be mindful, and it's an important part. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't sometimes have our attention captured. But one of the things that happens as we become more mindful is we begin to be much more aware. Oh, I'm paying attention right now to something that I didn't intend to pay attention to. I can let that go and bring myself back to this other thing that's more important to me. Right now, you might be able to do that for yourself. You might notice one of the many things that could distract you from this moment, and find yourself with a thought that just kind of intrudes suddenly, and you're aware of it, and you recognize that that thought isn't particularly valuable for you. So you let it go, and you come back to the thing that you choose to pay attention to. Now, one of the things that happens with this is that we have many thoughts every day that just arise. We don't necessarily know where they come from, but we can get caught up in that. We call that daydreaming. And daydreaming can sometimes be a source of creativity, and other times can simply be a source of distraction. It can become creative if we choose purposely to pay attention to it. But other thoughts, we need to be able to learn to be able to say, oh, that's just a thought, I can let that go. I don't have to, as one author put it, I don't have to believe everything I think. I don't believe everything somebody else says. Why would I feel like I have to believe everything I think? So I might think, for example, something that's really self-critical. Well, I can then choose whether or not to believe that, to pay attention to it, or to bring my attention to something else that's going to be more productive. That's a mindful activity of choosing to be present on purpose. The second aspect is to pay attention in the present moment. Now, I love this cartoon. I would want to learn to be in the moment, just not this moment, maybe some other moment, like a moment on the beach. Oftentimes, we're in moments that are difficult for us, and we choose to put ourselves in another place and another time by imagining ourselves somewhere else rather than being in this moment. And in fact, many of the relaxation strategies that you might be taught if you're having a lot of anxiety might be to take some time and imagine yourself in a more comfortable, more quiet, more peaceful place. And there might be times when that's valuable, but there are also many times when being in this moment is extremely important. Now, the fact is that we can't change the past. So we might have times when we are reliving our past, something we regret, but that's past. We can't do anything to change the past. We also can't change the future. So there are lots of times when we are imagining what's going to happen Oftentimes when we're imagining what's going to happen, we're imagining something dangerous, something awful, something threatening for us, and we're creating this catastrophic thought about what our future could be. But we can't change the future either. In fact, it was, I think, Mark Twain who's attributed to saying, all of my life I've imagined all kinds of terrible things that could happen to me, some of which actually happened. Most of the things that we think about that might be awful don't actually happen to us. And we spend energy and time and effort imagining things that aren't going to happen. Now, there are times even when we imagine something that might happen that might be bad, and then the future happens, and if it doesn't happen the way we imagined it, all of that time preparing for this awful thing doesn't really help us because it never happened. But if it does happen, then we have to go through it a second time. And imagining that it was going to happen first didn't stop it from happening when that time actually came. And so now we've experienced that distress twice instead of dealing with it just the one time. So living in the past, living in the future, aren't places that we can dramatically change our lives. And in fact, the only time I can change my life is in this moment. It is the choice that I make now that helps me to be able to prepare for the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment. But the time that I have where I can make a change in my life is now. So when I'm being mindful, part of what I need to do is to be able to be present to this moment right now. I'm going to give you an example. Somebody that I was working with a number of years ago, and this comes up fairly often. They were talking about meditation, and we'll talk about the connection between meditation and mindfulness in a moment. But they were talking about meditation, and they said to me, I was so angry that I couldn't meditate. Well, my question to that individual was, if you don't want to meditate then, what else could you do to deal with that anger in that moment? And in fact, being present to that moment was an opportunity for that individual to do something about the feeling that they were having. If, in fact, you are experiencing some sadness in this moment, paying attention to that sadness gives you the opportunity to do something about it. It could be a variety of things. One of the things we mentioned last time is that sadness sometimes is an invitation for us, that I need to pay attention to what's really, truly valuable in my life so that I can appreciate what's of value, I can align myself with what's of value, and I can let go of things that are less valuable. And that's doing something with that moment of sadness. There might be another time when I'm feeling sad, but actually in this moment there are lots of reasons to let that sadness go and to be present to this moment, because in this moment things are okay. Another person I remember talking with talked about, he was recovering from an addiction, and he had a relapse, and he was driving and got stopped by the police. The police were then starting to do that process of checking him out, and he knew that he was going to be discovered to have been using while he was driving under the influence. And so he called his sponsor. And his sponsor said something really, really, really important to him. He said, you're paying attention to what's going to happen to you in the future. But you can't change the future because you're not there yet. Right now, are you okay? Right in this moment, are you okay? And for him, that was a critical moment because he recognized that right in this moment, he was okay. And he was able to do that during the time that he was sentenced to a work release program by staying in the moment and taking care of each moment and making sure that in this moment he was responsible. In this moment he was taking care of his life. And when he was released, he was able to leave, and it's been many years now, and he has not had any more relapses because he was able to pay attention to the very difficult moment and do something about it rather than getting caught up in it. So being in this moment is a second aspect of the type of attention we pay when we are truly being mindful. The third element is to pay attention without judging. This is a tricky one. We will talk about, this doesn't say that there is no time for judging. This says that in this moment, whatever's going on, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, letting go of judging helps me to experience it more directly, experience it more fully. And then, after I've experienced it, I can choose what to do. So I'm going to come back to the phrasing that I used, pleasant or unpleasant. Well, so we kind of, even in psychology, we kind of sometimes use these terms in ways that aren't particularly helpful. So we think pleasant is good, unpleasant is bad. But let me give you an example of each where that gets flipped around. So if my pleasant experience is because I've just ingested some cocaine, that's going to be harmful for me even though it's pleasant. If my unpleasant experience is because I've touched a hot stove and my hand started to burn, which caused me to remove my hand from the burner, that's unpleasant, but helpful for me because it prevented me from additional injuries. Pleasant or unpleasant are states of being, but they don't tell us for sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And in fact, many of our experiences, it is necessary for us to first simply experience it for what it is before we make a judgment about it. Coming back to the experience of being sad. Being sad can be a doorway into getting stuck in depression. Being sad can also be a doorway into appreciating and valuing something that is really important so that we dedicate more of our time and attention to enhancing what's really important in our life and letting go of things that are less important. Judging can prevent us from doing that because I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel unpleasant feelings. If I judge that as negative, I am shutting off the ability to choose how I need to be in that situation. And choosing is a really important element that mindfulness gives us. Now here's the problem. So I'm paying attention in this moment. I'm in the present. I start to judge. I recognize, oh, I'm judging. Oh, this is terrible. I'm judging. I shouldn't be judging. I'm terrible at this. I'm judging myself now for judging. And I'm judging myself for judging that I'm judging. And it can become this quick spiral. The thing to do is to simply say, oh, that was a judgment. I'm going to let the judgment go so that I can pay attention in this moment without that judgment. Now, once I've paid attention, I can judge I can bring my full judgment into my choice of what to do next, not judging the experience itself. But the judgment is a way to make my choices responsible, ethical, moral, helpful for myself, so that the judging is delayed a little bit. Not a judgment of the experience, but a judgment about the choice that I make in recognizing that this experience is calling for me to make a choice. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this next question. The role of meditation in mindfulness. And it is often the case, even in many research studies, that these two things are confused. The goal of mindfulness is not to become an expert meditator. Even those individuals who are monks, whether we're talking about a Buddhist monk or a Christian monk or monks in other religious traditions, and many, perhaps most religious traditions have some tradition of meditation as part of their religious traditions. The goal isn't to be an expert meditator. The goal is to be more present on purpose to our own experience. Meditation is a way to practice this experience. So the reality is that we get good at what we practice. If I say I'm going to try to be present to my life all day long, every day, there are going to be most of the days that I am not going to be very good at this. What happens in meditation is that it gives me the opportunity to practice being present. So one of the things that will happen, if you haven't been doing a meditation practice and you just start and you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to get myself in a quiet place, I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to pay attention to my breathing, and I'm going to start to meditate. If you're normal, one of the very first things you will notice is that your mind wanders. Many, perhaps most people that I talk to then say to themselves and oftentimes to me, well, I can't meditate because I can't focus. The reality is that is paying attention to what's going on in this moment. What's going on in this moment is that I'm not focused. And I can't learn to be better focused by not practicing. Meditation gives me an opportunity to practice in a safe place. So I sit down, I close my eyes, I start to breathe, my mind wanders. I notice that my mind wanders. There's nothing harmful that's going to happen to me because my mind just wandered. But instead I can notice that, I can let it go, and I can bring myself back to what I am trying to pay attention to on purpose. In a few moments my mind wanders again. I notice it, I let go, I pay attention to what I'm trying to pay attention to on purpose. Over time, my practice of letting go and coming back to what I intend to focus on becomes stronger because I'm practicing. I'm going to come back to that person that I was talking about before that was trying to meditate when they were angry. If I am there and I'm feeling that emotion and I'm meditating, it's a safe place for me to explore that anger. I'm not hurting anybody at that point. I'm not even hurting myself. I'm just experiencing an emotion. Meditation provides me with a safe place to practice being able to pay attention on purpose, in the present moment, and without judging. And each time that doesn't happen and I recognize it, let it go, and come back to that practice, I'm getting a little stronger. I'm paying attention a little bit better. I'm bringing myself into that place where I am doing what I intend to do. I am staying with the moment, and I am letting go of judgment. And over time, we get better at what we practice. Now, for a person that's been doing this for more than 50 years, I can attest that that practice is extremely beneficial. I would not be able to pay attention on purpose in the present moment without judging as much as I am able to without that practice. But it is also the case, as my more than 50 years attest, that I have to keep practicing in order to keep that skill sharp. So it isn't that meditation is unhelpful, it is very helpful, but it isn't the goal. The goal is to be able to be mindful in my daily life. And my meditation practice, and it is practice, my meditation practice is an attempt to keep that always present while I am trying to keep that skill alive and helpful in my life to the best that it can. So that gives you an introduction to mindfulness. It isn't that with this introduction you can go and do everything you need to do, and in our future talks we will spend a little bit more time talking about how to develop a mindful presence for yourself. But next week we're going to talk about the power of developing a particular kind of optimism that will help us to be, with that particular type of optimism, will help us to be able to tip the odds so that we can have more and more good things happening in our lives and not get stuck in the negative spirals that depression often brings for us. So it isn't just any kind of optimism, it's a particular kind of optimism, and we'll be talking about that next week when we have our next session based on my book, The Prevention of Depression. Thanks.